Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, February 4th, 2019. Unless, of course, you're celebrating the Chinese New Year, in which case, I don't know. What year is it? I know the Chinese Zodiac. I don't know. How do they keep that? Do they have different numbers for the years? I assume so. Happy Chinese New Year if you're on the Chinese calendar. And if you are on the Chinese calendar, please get off. You have at least 1 month to move before they have to turn the page to the next month of the Chinese calendar. But there you have it. I forgot about that. That's absolutely true. Bruce McFarlane, I see you out there tweeting New Year's greetings from Beijing. So how you doing out there? Hope you're listening. Hope you're staying awake tonight. Did they drop anything? Anything iconic? Or are they just fireworks? What happens? It should be exciting. I used to be able to mark the Chinese New Year with a fantastic restaurant in the area, which has since closed, so I'm saddened by this, and my hints that the Chinese New Year is coming have likewise disappeared. Anyway, let's see. Perhaps you stayed up and watched the Super Bowl. Perhaps you didn't have to stay up to watch the Super Bowl. It's your normal, well within your normal viewing hours. It is here in our house, which is an unfortunate thing. And my Chinese New Year's resolution is to start going to bed earlier. How about that? I'll start doing my fire drills earlier. I gotta have some sort of reference to the fact that I keep talking about Chinese everything. And this might as well be something, horrific and stupid sounding, and maybe even racist. Is a Chinese fire drill racist? I don't know. Is it just people said it was Chinese because that was the only way they explained doing something out of the ordinary? I don't know what that was supposed to be about. Anyway, probably refrain from calling it that until we get a ruling on that one. You watched the Super Bowl? I really didn't. It turns out I know what happened in the Super Bowl. And I wasn't boycotting or anything. Just, well, for one thing, for me, these teams didn't make much of a difference. But for those of you who are excited about the teams, congratulations, particularly, I guess, if you were excited about the Patriots winning for the 5 millionth time. I don't know how exciting that would be for most people. I guess if I was a fan, I guess that would be the thing, right? I just want to win the Super Bowl forever. I don't know what happened last night. I watched some of the commercials. I enjoyed some of them. It wasn't a great crop this year, although I already forgot which one I like. Oh, yes, the Game of Thrones one, where they somehow... There's a lot of co-branding in the commercials last night, and that was sort of interesting and fun to watch. And then everybody started tweeting around pictures from Dana Perino saying she made queso. There's this picture of dishwater or something, and then I don't know. Apparently that was offensive to everybody. Queso in general is offensive to me. I just don't like cheese, although some people were pretty sure everybody really secretly desired to try this queso, but it really does looks like, I don't know what, vomit, possibly. Not a great morning topic, this queso, but everybody was having fun with that one. You know me, I don't like cheese. Cilantro tastes like soap, and whatever else I have to throw out there to offend the foodies. Let's see. Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine, by the way, in addition to the fact that Daily Co's Radio is live now, and we are welcoming you to, week something or other. I think we might even be in 106, 105th, maybe it is 105th week. I'll go check the calendar and see if it has Chinese New Year on it. Welcome to whatever week it is of the lazy, racist, perv White House apprentice. Yes, that's where we are. That's what the weekend was all about on the Donald Trump front. He got the chance to go down to Florida. That sometimes keeps him out of the news, but he did lots of pre-recorded interviews, and people were releasing transcripts of their other sit-downs with him. And, whenever he does that, I do not know why he agrees to do these things, but whenever he does them, everybody smacks their forehead anew at how clueless and just plain stupid he really is about everything. There's no way we could go through all the transcripts, but I can tell you this. Bill does say it's the year of the pig. So many punchlines, so little time. And isn't it, though? Hasn't it been the year of the pig since forever? It really feels like it's going on, I don't know, let's say it's third year in the year of the pig at this point. Let's see. What else is worth covering at this point? I don't know what to tell you. Well, Greg knows what to tell you. That's a good sign. Let's bring Greg in and let him tell you what happened over the weekend and elsewhere around the world. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
How are you?
So I didn't watch the Super Bowl either, and I didn't watch Trump's interview.
No, I missed that.
The Twitter, of course, comes in handy.
Yes.
And the best take I saw on the Super Bowl was that both teams were playing like they didn't want to go to the White House.
Yeah, and I think that was largely motivating everything. I guess I did see someone tweeting out congratulations to the Rams for avoiding the sentence of having to go to the Super Bowl.
So that means the Patriots won.
Yeah.
Which is hardly a surprise. They
right.
do that.
They do, except when the Giants get in there. But all right.
Or the Steelers. But,
right.
Whatever. I think they tied the Steelers now for 6 Super Bowls. I really don't like football. Too many concussions, too many CTE problems. But anyway,
yes.
It's an event that happened.
It did.
And then you get to be old enough to say, I remember when the commercials were funny.
Yeah, they weren't great.
SNL, which by the way, SNL, that's like Saturday Night Live.
Oh yes.
Donald Trump Jr. thinks it's S and L.
Oh, big
like
league.
Savings and Loan.
Oh, that's why. I could probably drain some money out of this and hurt people. Oh, yep.
Yeah, I suppose. Anyway, so I don't know that any of that happened. The big events of the weekend, we're watching the Northam Dead Man Walking watch.
Right. I didn't even watch that, and it was happening right here.
Well, they had a big meeting last night with staffers, including staffers of color. And, he said he's not going to resign, and I don't see how he stays. His entire party has deserted him. It's one thing when the Republicans tell you to resign. It's another thing when your own party tells you to resign.
Yeah.
So
I didn't understand.
And I'll just mention this not because I'm that interested in it, but apparently there was a story about the lieutenant governor, Fairfax, that was shopped around right before the election about him having some sort of sexual affair aggressiveness problem back in 2004. It was shopped to the Washington Post, who refused to print it because they couldn't verify it. And the same right-wing site that came up with the Northam blackface photo came up with this story and is recirculating it this morning. I'm just, pointing out that right-wing smears are never going to stop. So
right,
Virginia's kind of an interesting state. And, there's a little bit of turmoil in the state house. And when you don't have somebody who is, completely in charge and running the place, stuff happens.
Yeah.
And that's one of the major reasons why he's going to have to resign.
That's probably true. Again, the whole thing was bizarre from start to finish from my point of view. First of all, I didn't realize, did your medical school have a yearbook?
I don't even remember.
I can't recall.
If
I didn't go to medical
school. I'm not
school.
sure that I would have participated, and if I did, I have no idea what's in it.
Yeah, I don't know that that's all that common. Not that that means anything. They clearly did have one, and that's it. Although I do wonder, I did briefly wonder, are we sure that's a real thing? I only bring that up because, as I understand it, this website that had it and now is shopping around the Justin Fairfax story is an ex-Breitbart person who's apparently been bought out by one right-wing outfit or another. And it's weird when
I'm
blogs
sure they're
get
disgusting
bought
people,
for
but
thing.
these things still exist.
They do. But such things do exist. When a Breitbart person comes up with it and then comes up with another one right in a row to take out the entire line of succession to the governorship, I begin to wonder whether, could you pull out a copy of the book for me? I'm sure you're right. I just want to be sure that that's the page you're talking about.
I didn't pay attention to the first one until the Virginia Pilot verified it, and then the Washington Post did.
Okay.
And since nobody's verifying the second one, I'm not paying attention to it. I'm just mentioning that it exists.
I think by the time her story reached me, it had been verified enough. I do wonder sometimes. My first thought whenever I find out it's a Breitbart person has suddenly come up with this thing which, for instance, an entire other campaign would have killed to have a couple years ago. I wonder these things.
Well, do you remember when the National Enquirer came up with something on John Edwards?
Yes. I
stopped dismissing it just because it's a right-wing site.
Ah, okay.
The question is, can it be verified?
Well, I don't dismiss it. I just question it. There's two different things. I have a question about that.
I got that.
Oh, you're right about that? Okay, I can deal with that. Oh, you're wrong about that. Now I'm going to dismiss it.
Yes. Well, how centrist of you.
Yes. Well, both sides deserve a chance to speak about this, I guess.
I guess.
I don't know.
It's led to some very interesting discussion, and I think discussion that needs to be had. And I think it's important to take a step back and try to figure out what it all means. Matthew Dowd, for example, posted, "I've been pondering the last few days retributive versus restorative justice.
Okay.
As we examine mistakes of people's past, do we seek to punish first or do we seek to heal the wounds? Is the person remorseful, taking responsibility and seeking to repair damage? If so, do we let them?"
All right.
Well, that was an easy one for me because if Northam really wants to heal the wounds, why doesn't he step down and let the African-American lieutenant governor be governor?
Yeah, well,
Is he
that's a lucky
remorseful and
happenstance.
taking responsibility? Did you see his performance in the press conference? The answer is no.
No, although his initial statement was like, "That's a good statement."
Yeah, and then 24 hours later, he completely reversed on it. That's what cut out his taking responsibility and credibility. So once he did that, forget it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Made it worse, not better.
I can't figure out. I mean, the totality of it has me baffled. The discrete parts of it, did he do that? Seems to be the case. Is that inexcusable? Yeah. Was it extremely late even in history for something like that to be done? Yeah, it really was. I don't know. I mean, there are some sort of backwards places, but I mean, wow.
Yeah, 60s I get, 80s no. Amy Walter was also commenting on Matthew Dowd's tweet that I just read, and she said, "I've been thinking about this too, but I'm focused on the term reckoning. So much wrong has been and continues to be done to so many via structural racism and sexism. The reckoning for it will be uneven and feel unfair. But country can't heal or repair without it," which I think is true. And, one of the better pieces that I think that was written about this, by the way, was from Never Trumper Tom Nichols, who was writing in the Washington Post. I have this in the Pundit Roundup. I'll give it to you at the end of my list here so you can find it easy. There it is. "Sorry, Republicans, you can't call out Northam for racism and give Trump a pass." Oh, wow. And if it's too long and you didn't read it, the headline pretty much tells you what's going on there.
Yeah. And they will, and they'll do it, and they'll continue to do it. And that's part of it that seems unfair is we will do this and clean house, and they will continue to refuse to every single time.
But we're better than they are.
Scratch our heads.
They let
say,
Steve King stay. I'm sorry, we're just better than they are, and there's nothing wrong with being better than they are.
No, the rewards are not immediate. So, okay, the rewards aren't immediate.
Right.
There may not even be any.
Ralph Northam being stubborn about stepping down sort of reminds me a little bit of Eric Greitens, the ex-governor of Missouri.
Yes.
When it was pretty clear he had to go, he didn't go immediately.
No.
But he went. And ultimately it didn't hurt Josh Hawley's election campaign against Claire McCaskill. I say that because, again, the press, in its infinite both sides way, says, "Oh, look at Ralph Northam in Virginia. This is going to cause problems for Democrats going forward."
I see.
Because how can they do X or Y? Well, 3 days after he's out, even if it takes him a week, it doesn't change the calculus for 2020. So it's kind of a stupid take. Things that are true today must be true tomorrow. the same reasoning that says that Trump's base will never desert him, except you don't know that. That's only true yesterday.
Yes.
It's not necessarily true tomorrow.
Okay.
Which is why Trump is so unpopular and getting less popular. By the way, there's new polling on the wall. There's new polling on a bunch of stuff. But there's new polling on the wall, new Gallup poll. 60% opposed significant new construction on the border walls. 57% opposed it in June as the issue heated up. So the more Trump tries to sell it, the less popular it gets.
I see.
I'm thinking his son-in-law was kind of wrong about that.
Yeah. Well, among many things, yes.
Among many things, we were told that if Trump would only go on TV and speak from the Oval Office, he would sell the country on all of this.
Yeah. Sure.
But that's not working. 81% support a
that.
path to citizenship for immigrants in the U.S. illegally, according to Gallup. And so, not my wording, the idea that what Trump is doing is, quote, working, unquote, and those definitely are scare quotes around working, is belied by actual data. And I mention that because Nancy Pelosi has said that the committee of senior, gnomes who's meeting in Washington, the joint committee there to figure out what to do with the budget, has until Friday to come up with stuff. The deadline is mid-February, but you need to give the House and Senate time to look at and vote on whatever they come up with. So she said basically it has to be done by Friday.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to comply with the rules, they frequently end up having to waive the rules for these things.
Yeah, but that's you got to give people a deadline or they won't work for it.
Right, absolutely. This is happening. It's coming up. It's February 4th right now. What do we have? To the 14th, 15th? Which one's Friday?
Yeah, to the 15th, I believe.
So, yeah, not a lot of time, and people forget that. They went out and went to Super Bowl parties, and now you got to write a budget.
Now, while they're trying to do this, Trump keeps saying, I'm not going to accept this, I'm not going to accept this, I'm not going to accept this.
Yeah, right. Good.
But at the same time, Mitch McConnell is telling him, well, Republicans aren't going to accept an emergency declaration.
Oh. Well, I wonder who's right.
Well, I have to find this. This was in the Washington Examiner, and I only skimmed it, so I don't remember the entire thing. Dave Drucker wrote it, and it goes something like this. If Trump does do a declaration of emergency,
yes,
then Pelosi, with a straight up and down vote, gets to say in the House, we disapprove of this. And then she forces the Senate to vote on it, whether McConnell wants to or not. And that's also a majority vote. Here's the article I'm getting all this stuff from.
Oh, yeah. Okay, right. Let's see.
And therefore, the Senate, McConnell is telling Trump will embarrass Trump because definitely a majority will vote against the president. Now, he can go ahead and veto that.
Yep.
But that puts Senate Republicans in an even dicier position. And that's what McConnell is trying to avoid. He's trying to protect his senators.
Yeah. Trump doesn't understand that or very often care about that. He says, be tough. But, yeah.
Here's the article. It says, Pelosi could force Senate Republicans into awkward vote on Trump emergency powers.
Yeah, could.
And he could.
I have my doubts about how, these days I always find myself questioning, okay, I read the rules, I see. Senate must then vote, within a certain number of days after the House. Where's the part that tells me, right? Yeah, well, there's that. And where's the part that tells me what happens if they just say, I'm not gonna. And usually that's missing from the rules and the statutes. But it says you have to. I know what it says. What if I'm busy that day? And I just don't do it. Oh, I don't know. It doesn't say what happens because we didn't write that in the rules. Because of course you will, because it says you have to. Well, might not have to.
Well, that's so interesting. The Republicans really have become the I'm not gonna party.
Yeah, I mean, they'll have to whip votes on Merrick Garland.
It's precedent.
Maybe we don't have to.
This is the way we do things. These are norms. Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna. But it's usually the White House that does that, not so much the Senate.
Yeah, but the biggest one going is still Merrick Garland.
Yes.
So that's them.
Yes. So I was remembering Merrick Garland this morning,
Yeah. Like an in memoriam sort of.
That's my next poll.
He's alive.
A longish story here. But this is from Politico Morning Consult poll. Soak the rich? Americans say go for it. Policies once seen as far left enjoy broad support in polling.
Cool.
The prospect of 70% tax rates for multimillionaires and special levies on the super rich, and remember, these are marginal rates.
Yeah. Already there. People screaming.
Drew howls about creeping socialism and warnings of economic disaster in much of Washington, but polling suggests when it comes to soaking the rich, the American public is increasingly on board.
Yeah.
Surveys are showing overwhelming support for raising taxes on top earners, including a new Politico Morning Consult poll released Monday, that would be today, that found 76% of registered voters believe the wealthiest Americans should pay more in taxes. A recent Fox News survey showed that 70% favor raising taxes on those earning over $10 million. Including the 54% of Republicans in that poll. And the numbers suggest the political ground upon which the 2020 presidential campaign will be fought is shifting in dramatic ways, reflecting the rise in inequality in the U.S. and growing concerns in the electorate about the fairness of the American system. So, in other words, the basic assumption that conservative and centrist pundits make that Americans hate taxes, and if you mention taxes, it's a third rail and you will get fried, is completely wrong. The idea that a marginal tax rate of 70% on some figure yet to be determined is, quote, far left. That's their favorite thing. Mitch McConnell loves to use that one.
Far.
Is wrong because the vast majority of the public supports such concepts.
Yeah.
So I tweeted this morning that 70% marginal tax rates are too high, say centrist pundits. And I agree. Let's compromise at 69. And, of course, everybody responded to me with nice.
Yeah. That's what they do these days.
But do you know why they do that?
Why they began doing it?
Why they began
why
saying
they
nice
chose the word
whenever
nice.
somebody says 69 and something?
But why? I don't know why they chose the word nice. They could have chosen the word awesome.
They could, but they chose nice.
It's not
And
awesome,
actually,
it's just nice.
It comes from Merrick Garland.
Does it?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Because Barack Obama, on 13 May 2016, tweeted with big, bold, yellow letters, 69% of majority of Americans want the Senate to hold hearings and vote on Judge Garland. And everybody responded, nice. And from that point onward, whenever you see 69 in a tweet, people generally say nice to you.
Yes.
In various and sundry.
And
that's where it comes from, just so you know. This historical moment has been brought to you by Kagro in the morning.
I guess so. I tried to get somebody to do that in an email in a work setting, and they were like, no, I'm not. Merrick Garland.
This is not a work setting, so you can do this. So all you have to do is, if somebody says that to you, just respond, Merrick Garland.
Right, and then people will think it's respectable somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. That's nice.
That's Merrick Garland.
That's right.
So, the point is, of course, that if you're going to talk about how ridiculous, and I have issues with some of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does. I think that sometimes she goes a little bit too far, makes some rookie mistakes. It's going to happen.
Cool.
I'm more tolerant of it, perhaps, than other people are. But the fact of the matter is, she introduced the 70% marginal tax rate to the discussion. And whereas everybody pointed to her and said far left socialism, the fact of the matter is the American public actually think it's a very good idea. Yeah. That, by definition, makes it a centrist idea.
Yes, except for the definition part, which is up to the people who like to wring their hands and worry in the press, and they say it's something completely different.
Well, but here's David Leonhardt writing today. What's really radical? Not taxing the rich.
Right.
It's time to reverse the extreme upward redistribution of the last 40 years. The ground is changing, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Imagine for a moment, he says, that a presidential candidate made this speech. My fellow Americans, I'm here today to tell you about my economic plan. Each year, I require every middle-class family across this great country to write a check. We'll then pool the money and distribute it to the richest Americans among us, the top 1%, who, because of their talent, virtue, and success, deserve even more money. The exact size of the check will depend upon a family's income, but a typical middle-class household will hand over $15,000 each year. This plan, I promise all of you, will create the greatest version of America that has ever existed.
Yeah.
Well, if you think that that's politically crazy and destructive, I've just described the actual changes in the American economy since the 70s.
I thought that was a great plan, and I am waiting for my job to be created.
Well, the funny thing is, though, that Donald Trump, if he truly wanted to be, outside of both parties and take a third road, the road not taken, he could be a populist champion for wealth redistribution and make himself far more popular than he currently is, instead of just playing to his base on the racism stuff. But of course he doesn't, because he doesn't understand any of this. And he himself would be subject to some of these taxes, and therefore there's no way.
That was briefly a promise he held out during the campaign when he realized.
I remind people of this. People say, well, how can you talk about Trump being a centrist or a moderate when he's obviously such a right-wing nutcase radical who doesn't really think about anything? And the answer is because he campaigned as one.
That's true. I do remember
him.
He
didn't govern as one, but he campaigned as one.
The one time he was able to read the crowd as he realized that rallies, these guys don't have millions of dollars. I wonder how would they respond if I said, I know that the rich have taken advantage of everyone for a long time. I am rich. That's how I know it. That was his big pitch, and only I can fix it was part of that pitch was, I'm the only one who knows how to get rich people to pay their fair share, in addition to fixing, the draining the swamp nonsense, et cetera, et cetera. That was and you know what? It was very popular then. So, I don't know. I'm not certain why he abandoned that part, except that he smelled money. That must be it. All right.
There's our music.
Yes. So we have 30 seconds to talk about how we're going to go on break, and then we'll go. But now we have 20.
We'll figure out something to talk about on the other side. I mean, there's the great article in Rolling Stone about Mitch McConnell, enemy of the boat.
Oh.
There's a piece about reminding people that Kirsten Gillibrand actually brought some 9/11 health relief to the New York City constituency she has. She's pretty good at legislating.
Oh, well, that's usually helpful.
And then there's measles. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air. And now that's down to about 1 in 15. But we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you. But remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And Greg's still with us. We have lots to round up. And I don't know where you want to begin. But...
Well, let's start with measles. There's this big outbreak in Washington State, 44 cases now. And according to Clark County Public Health, I'm getting this from Gizmodo. According to Clark County Public Health, 37 of the confirmed cases in Clark County were in individuals who had not received the MMR vaccination. That stands for measles, mumps, rubella. Rubella is German measles, which prevents against measles, mumps, and rubella. Though one infected person had gotten 1 dose rather than 2, 32 of the confirmed cases are in children 10 years or younger. And so anti-vax sentiment is having a toll. Measles can be a deadly disease. This is a horrible thing to happen. And measles is incredibly infectious. It's just about the most infectious viral disease we know. If somebody who has measles walks into a room and coughs and then leaves, the virus is floating in the air for about an hour. So if you then go into that room a half hour later, you can catch it.
That sounds like fun. A guy with measles walks into a bar.
That's why everybody needs to be vaccinated. And although the vaccine is actually pretty effective, it's one of the more effective vaccines. It doesn't make you measles proof. And there was this terrific simulator that The Guardian published. If you want to find it, it's a visual. Google, watch how the measles outbreak spreads when kids get vaccinated and when they don't. And what happens is it'll run this simulation over and over, showing you what it looks like in a community where only 10% of the community has been vaccinated. Just about everybody gets it. And when 90% of the community is vaccinated, just about no one gets it. In fact, after you get above about 80% vaccination rates, you're fairly protected. But if you fall below that, like 75, then people are going to get measles. Not as much as if nobody's vaccinated. So the more you vaccinate, the better you are. But if you really want to protect the community, like everybody has to get their shot. So one of my favorite cartoons that's circulating this morning that people keep sending me is a little baby boy sitting on the exam table with the doctor listening to him from behind with the stethoscope, as they often do, and the parents are looking there worried. And, of course, the kid is covered with these little red dots. And the pediatrician says to the parents, you know, if you connect the dots, it spells out your parents are idiots.
Anti-vax. It's so fun. This keeps happening, too. And,
but it's real, you know, and then, oh my gosh, what can I do to help prevent this? And then, of course, they turn to herbal supplements and all this other stuff. It's just stupid. Vaccinate your kids, and then you don't have to worry about things that don't work because it's natural. Measles is natural. Not getting measles. It's an intervention, and it's a wise one. And I published on the Pundit Roundup this morning, the very last thing was a terrific chart of the prevalence of all the diseases after a vaccine is licensed. How measles, for example, disappeared in the 60s for hepatitis, for chickenpox, for mumps, all the different things that happen once you license a vaccine. The prevalence of the disease just drops off. And that is true until you stop vaccinating. So the other day, I think it was Radio Free Tom Nichols, the very same one we were talking about in terms of telling the Republican Party, don't go there with Northam, you have no moral standing, talked about treaties and NATO and the Russians having license to make new nuclear weapons because the Americans are pulling out of some of the treaties we signed thanks to Donald Trump.
That's awesome.
And he said, you know, this is like the anti-vaccination nonsense. You don't realize how much you're protected until you don't have it anymore.
All right. Well, that is an interesting comparison. I hadn't thought to make that one. My thought ran over the weekend to rewriting.
It's working, therefore we don't need it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's true. Racism is over, so we don't need voting rights protection. We've done the same thing there, too.
Right. The whole idea is that when you construct things to help, we don't need that dam. We haven't had a flood here in like 50 years, ever since the dam was built. Let's just get rid of it. Who needs it?
Yeah.
The upkeep is like costing us money. We hate paying taxes. Let's just get rid of the dam.
Close the government.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, nobody likes the government, and it doesn't do anything for anybody. Close it. It runs everything. Dang. Yeah, my thoughts over the weekend were about rewriting the end of the movie Outbreak to where the army doctors. You remember the movie? Have you seen that one?
I have not. Seen it.
It's a Dustin Hoffman's U.S. Army
I'm guessing. I'm guessing there's an outbreak then.
Yes, there is an outbreak. A lethal virus that had originally been developed as a biological weapon.
Bird flu.
Develop oh really?
Bird flu wasn't really developed as a biological weapon, but that's what all the rumors
good rumor. I like it. They developed a vaccine in the end and saved the town. This town was quarantined with it, and the army, in its effort to preserve the weapon, was going to just bomb the town. They were going to firebomb the thing.
We got to destroy this town in order to save it.
Right, in order to save save the weapon. But he develops this vaccine and he intervenes to save the town. And I'm thinking of rewriting the ending for that. He develops the vaccine, but 75% of the population refuses to give it to their kids, and he changes his mind and calls the bomber back.
Yeah,
that's where we would be now.
Right. Instead, they go with homeopathic medicine.
Yes, right. We'll wait for you to solve this outbreak while the rest of us die around you because you don't like the idea of a vaccine. Sure. Terrific. Great idea. Okay. Well, there's lots of good examples of how we do eliminate things once they've proven their effectiveness. How interesting. 70% marginal tax rates, for instance, would be another one. We don't need this. We're doing great. Economic boom, more or less, more economic mobility, more equality. Let's get rid of it. Let's create jobs. Sure.
Right. So I'm going to skip out and actually go to work. But
you need to go to work
before I
for?
do,
You're
I'm
doing
going
fine.
to leave you with a couple of stories that might be worth going over. This is a really good one by Jamil Smith in Rolling Stone. Mitch McConnell, enemy of the vote. The Senate Majority Leader mocked a bill expanding ballot access while staying silent on foreign threats to our elections.
Are you mocking me?
He did those things.
That's
And so, that's worth calling him out on. Just like it's worth calling him out on the fact that he had that, when he was younger, big smiling picture of him in front of the giant Confederate flag.
Ah, yes, that was circulating over the weekend in the wake of the Northam thing.
Exactly.
Along
right.
with a reminder that Kentucky was not a Confederate state, which is weird.
Yeah, well, Corey Stewart is weird. He ran in Virginia as a Confederate, even though he's from, Minnesota or something.
Yes, that is also strange. Heritage.
And Steve King has a Confederate flag on his desk.
Yeah,
and he's from Iowa. What part of the Confederacy was Iowa? I forget.
Yeah, the mean, nasty, rotten, racist part.
So all of that. And I don't know how much you want to talk about Virginia, the new Virginia, the Northern Virginia versus the rest of the state. And I mean, there's lots of stuff to talk about, but it won't be me. It'll be you because I'm gone.
Yeah, just telling you, there's a lot to talk about.
I'm just telling you, lots of stuff is happening out there. So basically, it's going to be a very interesting week. At the backdrop for all of this is Trump trying to figure out how to keep the government open, except I don't know that he knows how. And if he's getting advice from Jared Kushner, we're all doomed.
Yes.
While the short-term issue is going to be your governor and how your state tries to figure out how to deal with this. And with that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking to my good friend David Waldman, Virginia resident, Kagro in the morning.
Yes.
And I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll see how it all settles out.
Yes, by that time, Trump will have given his State of the Union address. I almost forgot to mention that, and we'll be reacting to that, on Wednesday.
That thing that you didn't watch.
Right, it stunk, and we didn't watch it. All right, there, we're done. Now we can move on to Thursday, and we'll see you then, too.
We'll see you then, too. Take care.
All right, thank you. You do the same. Back to work. Why he has to go to work? I mean, there's money in the bank. What do we need to work for, right? Let's just stop. Get rid of this dam. Stop vaccinating your kids, and cut the top income tax rate to 12%. Why not? Go for it. More jobs will be created. All right, like we said, there's lots going on. No way to catch up with it all, obviously. But just to recap for the weekend, there was any number of great transcripts, by which I mean transcripts that reveal the terrible state that the presidency is in, occupied as it is by a total moron who knows nothing about anything. In addition, there was more, how do we say it in the Morning Post? Bean spilling, I think, from alleged insiders in the alleged administration who are revealing various facts and figures about how the place operates that just tends to reinforce everything we've heard so far about the president knowing little to nothing about what he's doing or how to do the job. Which one was it that pointed out that, let's see, so in addition to all of these things, there was a very specific strain of bean spilling that went on over the issues of national security. There, and here it is. I guess Time magazine must have been the one that, it was among the ones that led the way with this one, and by which I mean led their way into pocket here. I saw it, and so it therefore led the way. Looks like we're going to get some auto-playing video here, so let me see if I can get all the bells and whistles turned off here so that we don't hear it anyway. Their headline was the one that made the big splash. Willful ignorance inside President Trump's troubled intelligence briefings. You've probably heard the stories over the weekend. I think this is a relatively brief pass at it, so it makes for a good summation if you missed any of it, and some of the details are really astonishing. John Walcott is the author of this piece, again, Time Magazine. In the wake of President Donald Trump's renewed attacks on the U.S. intelligence community this week, and you'll recall that this stems from the unclassified threats briefing before, was it the Senate Intelligence Committee? The various players in the intelligence community came to testify before Congress and assessed in an unclassified way the various threats we face around the world, North Korea, Russia, wherever else they might have spoken about, Nicaragua, Venezuela, anything, essentially. But in all cases, Iran, others, in all cases, they laid out a view of the situation that can only be described as contradictory to the way the president describes them when he speaks publicly. And although presidents very frequently put will perhaps attach a rosier view to some things and a more pessimistic view sometimes about other things, this is the president's views on international threats just are not in keeping in any way with the assessments of the intelligence community, which led to a back and forth that concluded at the end of last week with the president saying that the intelligence community leaders didn't know what they were talking about. And anyway, it didn't matter because they had in fact not contradicted him, but instead said that he was 100% right. And they just left it right there at Banana Republic setting and walked away from it. And he flew away and played golf for the weekend in Florida. Commentary on the golf playing. He played with Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus, which is a great pairing if you get the chance to play with the two. I thought the only thing that came away interested, or the only interesting thing that I thought that came out of this was, well, one, I got to see some video of Trump's swing on the range, and he's got an old man swing. This is all I can say about that. But, he is one, so it's not such a bad thing. But I saw a photo of him with the two pros, and I found it interesting. Jack Nicklaus, I wonder, he's there for golfing for the weekend, golfing purely for fun. He's there. Trump's in his standard golf uniform. I know this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm saying it anyway. Trump's there in his standard outfit, the white shirt, which is a bad look for him, period. I think the red hat, black pants, white shoes, which is a little odd, like this sort of reverse Oreo thing going on. Although he's got this tremendous expanse of shirt and pants. And then the white shoes, which, I don't know, that's odd. I wouldn't do it. Tiger Woods looking like Tiger Woods always looks. Jack Nicklaus, for casual weekend golfing, I thought this was really striking. They told me who's in the picture. I'm like, where's Nicklaus? He's in a cap and a very, casual polo shirt, but patterned, like is unusual for him, and khaki shorts, and then those little ankle height white socks and black sneaker style golf shoes, like any weekend duffer might put on to, for just a quick walk around. And it was amazing. It's almost as if I wonder whether he differentiates between, or maybe it's just that he's retired and doesn't care anymore, and it's like, I'm just going to be comfortable. But I was curious about whether, you're thinking of me looking like this, and show, put up a picture of me at a tournament. I dress this way when I'm at work. When I'm playing golf, playing golf, I dress like any normal human being. It's hot. I put some shorts on. I need this comfortable shirt on. This one is roomier and feels nicer and looks better. I enjoy it more. And a hat, too, as opposed to his usual hatless thing on the golf course and slacks. You know how the old school golfers are. And even the current golfers. You don't wear shorts. It's not, well, I think the PGA doesn't allow it, actually. But just, I don't know. You would think that he had gotten used to it and would stick with the uniform. But I guess not. And I like that in a way, except that I don't like that he hangs out with Trump. So, anyway, it's neither here nor there. I just thought that was interesting. That you wouldn't have heard much about over the weekend. Whereas this thing about the intelligence briefings, you probably did. So, back to them. In the wake of President Donald Trump's renewed attacks on the U.S. intelligence community this week, remember, they're all wrong. They're really agreeing with me. They should go back to school, I think, is the line he ended up using for them, which is a dumb person's insult. But okay. Senior intelligence briefers are breaking 2 years of silence to warn that the president is endangering American security with what they say is a stubborn disregard for their assessments. Very interesting. And of course, sometimes people get hung up on their version of things, and anybody who doesn't believe it is stupid, and I understand that. But it is really odd how frequently he finds himself at odds with them. Citing multiple in-person episodes, these intelligence officials say Trump displays what one called willful ignorance when presented with analyses generated by America's $81 billion a year intelligence services. That's an interesting point, $81 billion a year. The officials, who include analysts who prepare Trump's briefs, not the ones, he wears, but I don't really want to know about how they get prepared, but and the briefers themselves, and they're two different people, describe futile attempts to keep his attention by using visual aids. Remember that? You can only keep his attention by using visual aids. Well, it turns out that that's futile too. So you might as well give him a good briefing. He'll just ignore that. Confining some briefing points to 2 or 3 sentences and repeating his name and title as frequently as possible. That's like, wow. I mean, honestly, you would brief a dog this way. And that's his favorite insult, right? I'm briefing you like a dog. I have to repeat your name and your title, which is dog, or good boy, as frequently as possible. What is most troubling, and that's not it, apparently, say these officials and others in government and on Capitol who have been briefed on the episodes, are Trump's angry reactions when he is given information that contradicts positions he has taken or beliefs he holds. 2 intelligence officers even reported that they have been warned to avoid giving the president intelligence assessments that contradict stances he has taken in public. Sort of an important part of the job, telling the truth about what you think is going on out there in the world. That reaction was on display this week, that would have been last week, at a congressional hearing on national security threats. The leaders of all the major intelligence agencies, including the directors of National Intelligence, the CIA, and the FBI, contradicted Trump on issues relating to North Korea, Russia, the Islamic State, which they really shouldn't elevate to this level, but okay, and Iran. In response, Trump said the intelligence chiefs were, quote, passive and naive, unquote, and suggested they, quote, should go back to school. There's not really a school for that, but okay. The intelligence officials criticizing Trump requested anonymity because the briefings they described, including the President's Daily Brief, or PDB, are classified. Not that that matters because Jared Kushner is stealing them and giving them to the Sauds. But anyway, the PDB is one of the most highly restricted products produced by U.S. intelligence analysts, not anymore. A select group of intelligence officials is involved in preparing these briefings. A small number of senior officials, often including the Director of Central Intelligence, Director of National Intelligence, or the heads of other agencies, depending on the topic, usually deliver it. The reporting for this story is based on interviews with multiple officials who have firsthand knowledge of the episodes they describe and multiple others who have been briefed on them. Asked in detail about the officials' concerns, senior White House and National Security Council officials declined to comment. The problem has existed since the beginning of Trump's presidency, because that's how long he's been an idiot. The the intelligence officials say, and for a time they tried to respond to the president's behavior in briefings with dark humor. After a briefing in preparation for a meeting with British Prime Minister Theresa May, for example, the subject turned to the British Indian Ocean Territory of Diego Garcia. The island is home to an important air base and a U.S. naval support facility that are central to America's ability to project power in the region, including in the war in Afghanistan. The president, officials familiar with the briefing said, asked two questions. Her and der. Are the people nice? And are the beaches good? Heavier sigh in that one. Some of us wondered if he was thinking about our alliance with the Brits and the security issues in an important area where the Chinese have been increasingly active, or whether he was thinking like a real estate developer, one of the officials said wryly. And I'm reminded this morning that the people of Diego Garcia were apparently forcibly removed from the island in order to make way for these military bases. So, are the people nice? Maybe. You'll have to go elsewhere to ask them, but they have every reason not to be. Are the beaches good? Are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind? That's what he wants to know. In another briefing on South Asia, Trump's advisors brought a map with the region from Afghanistan to Bangladesh, according to intelligence officers with knowledge of the meeting and congressional officials who were briefed on it. Trump, they said, pointed at the map and said he knew that Nepal was part of India. Hey, everybody, guess what I know? Look at this. This country here is part of India. And by the way, they do mention in here at the end of this paragraph, last August, Politico reported on the president's mispronunciation of the names of the two countries. There's a second one coming up. During the same briefing, can you guess how he mispronounced Nepal? Yes. That first thought that occurred to you is correct. You're not just 12 years old. You understand the president very well. I know that nipple is a part of India. You know what? Depending on what you mean, you are either out of your mind or technically correct. But no, Nepal, the independent country, not a part of India. Near India? Yeah, sure. Part of it? No, really not. Nipple? No, it's Nepal. Moving right along, though. Don't worry. Sir, actually, it's an independent nation. Oh, yeah? Well, I'll show you something. How about this country right here, Bhutan, which, of course, he pronounces as Button, is also a part of India. I know Button is a part of India. It's also not a part of India, and it's also not Button. Oh, well, that's too bad. All right, well, and of course he takes this very well. No, Bhutan, independent kingdom, not part of India, not pronounced Button. Nipple and Button. This idiot is president of the United States, allegedly. But the disconnect between Trump and his intelligence briefers is no joke, so stop laughing, the officials say. Several pointed to concerns regarding Trump's assessment of the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear capabilities after Trump's summit with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last summer. The North claimed to have destroyed its major underground nuclear testing facility. I'll tell you where it is. It's in this city right here. It's circled right here on my screen. Punggye-ri? Punggye-ri, I'm guessing. You tell me whether we've pronounced that one incorrectly. Probably. And Trump has gone out of his way, by the way, of course, to claim the credit for the North's claim to have destroyed this. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, did you know we had one? NGIA, which oversees the spy satellites that map and photograph key areas, had tried to impress upon Trump the size and complexity of the North Korean site. Didn't work, apparently. In preparing one briefing for the president on the issue early in his administration, the NGIA built a model of the facility with a removable roof, according to two officials. To help Trump grasp the size of the facility, the NGIA briefers built a miniature version of New York's Statue of Liberty to scale and put it inside the model. Oh my God, the Norks have kidnapped the Statue of Liberty. What are we going to do? It's just a model to show you the scale. Scale? Don't talk to me about scales. Intelligence officials from multiple agencies later warned Trump that entrances at the facility that had been closed after the summit could still be reopened. But the president has ignored the agency's warnings and has exaggerated the steps North Korea has taken to shutter the facility. Those officials and two others say that is a particular concern now ahead of a possible second summit with Kim Jong-un later this month. The briefers' concerns are spread across multiple areas of expertise. Two briefers worry that a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping? Xi? Is that, or Xi Jinping. Still working on that one. Could produce a trade agreement that the president can trumpet, but that fails to address China's espionage, its theft of intellectual property that ranges from circuit boards to soybean hybrids, its military buildup, and its geopolitical ambition. Three other officials worry about what one of them calls precipitous troop withdrawals from Syria and Afghanistan and a peace deal with the Taliban that in time would leave the extremist Islamic group back in charge and wipe out the gains made in education, women's rights, and governance since the U.S. invaded the country more than 17 years ago. For now, the briefers are heartened by the intelligence community leaders who risked Trump's ire by contradicting him in public testimony this week. The danger, one former intelligence official said, is that those leaders and other intelligence briefers may eventually stop taking such risks in laying out the facts for the president. Not that laying out facts for this president means anything in particular, but I guess it's good news that they can always point to this stuff and say, well, we did tell you. The fact that you were unable or unwilling to do anything about it is, I guess, someone else's problem, and I guess maybe that's all of our problems. I don't know. Anyway, this is just one of many revelations over the weekend of his inattention to important facts, his inability to grasp certain things. Yes, he is getting ready to meet with Kim Jong-un again and keeps bragging of their fabulous rapport. And I'm not sure what that's likely to produce from the next round of meetings, except more bragging points. But yeah, we may have the official intelligence community may be completely disconnected from the decision makers for the first time ever. Very scary. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's just state for the record before exiting from the segment entirely that the big danger, or one of the big dangers, I should say, of having this kind of disconnect between the president, crazy or not, and the intelligence community, this much disconnect. There's been disconnect before, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But and it should be pointed out that this came up a couple of days ago, that the president, I don't remember exactly how we stated it, but somebody who had summarized what happened last week by saying, the president was mocking the intelligence community agency heads and saying they should go back to school and belittling their ability to understand developments in the world correctly, in his view, and that only he could interpret the intelligence correctly. It was meant to be shocking and worrisome, but I did find myself asking, substantively, how different was it from what Dick Cheney did? And he did on behalf of George W. Bush, who just was, I guess, largely uninterested in dealing with those subjects. And I don't know if I can put my finger on any serious and substantive difference. I mean, that is what Dick Cheney did. He did mock the ability of the intelligence community to properly understand and interpret intelligence, and that only he had the skills and ability to do that, and that they were wrong and he was right, and we ought to be acting on his view of what was happening around the world and his view of the intelligence and the story that it told, and not the agencies. And that was scary in its own way, but it's really not that different. It's perhaps scarier now. This is what's really scary is you have to look at this and say, strictly as between Dick Cheney and Donald Trump, who do you think is more trustworthy in interpreting intelligence and determining policy direction? And that's scary because I don't know what to say to that. I don't know if I have an answer. On the one hand, well, Dick Cheney would certainly be more traditional in the way he approached things. He would be more predictable than Trump. And in some ways, predictability is less scary. But then again, unpredictability might occasionally lead you to accidentally do something I might agree with. I don't know. I'm not certain how to label the relative dangers of those two, but that is what they did. And the conclusion you're meant to take away from that, by the way, if you haven't found it already, is that maybe there isn't something all that unusual about Donald Trump, or that maybe, at the very least, you should realize that this is a continuing Republican problem, and this is the way they govern. Sometimes with savvy but evil operators, and sometimes with stupid but evil operators. But evil operators nonetheless. And I guess one other point that we really have to make at some point is the United States intelligence community is not, because of this, they contradict Trump. Yes. They'll even contradict Dick Cheney when the opportunity arises. And both of them deserve to be disagreed with, and both deserve to be not countermanded, but challenged in their interpretation of intelligence. But the people who do it, even if it's done successfully against those two targets, are not friends of the progressive community or anything like that. You got to remind people of that from time to time, that you're supposed to be taking what they have to say with a grain of salt. You're not supposed to then, necessarily just say, well, I should be able to grab whatever I want out of a hat and say that's going to be international policy on or foreign policy on this or whatever. But I mean, at its heart, a more traditional approach would be to incorporate at least some of what they have to say, because at least some of it is based in reality. I wanted to point out that it's not necessarily the case that the intelligence services are always right about these things, or even that they always refrain from shaping the interpretation of the intelligence to their own advantage. They do that. And they're not people who must never be disagreed with. They are, though, relatively serious actors in all of this. And a normal president will have some healthy degree of skepticism and some healthy level of disagreement with the intelligence communities, and is probably best to keep that more or less to yourself, rather than say, you're all naive and you need to go back to school. All right. So with that caveat out there, I guess we can probably move on to a couple of the other interpretations. And I guess one of the other big stories of the weekend comes from Axios, which always gives me pause because I'm not a huge fan, but we do turn to them rather more frequently than I feel comfortable with. But there it is. Their big scoop of the weekend, labeled as such. Scoop. Insider leaks Trump's executive time-filled private schedules. Alexei McCammond and Jonathan Swan on this story, and I understand that there already is pushback from people inside the Trump White House who consider this a big betrayal and that it's not fair because these schedules don't reflect all the time that the president spends fielding phone calls and making phone calls and taking awesome meetings with people. If you eliminate phone calls to and from Mar-a-Lago pals and reminiscing about the time that they ran, back when I just divorced Marla and we used to run around playing grab ass with the towel girls on the pool deck. That's not helpful to the national security, so that really can't count. But there you have it. This is, I don't know who put this out. I don't know who thought it was a great idea to type it up in the first place. But the claim is they have this anonymous leak of the president's schedule and that it's executive time, lunch, television. In other words, the other day when the story broke that the president was telling people who were on White House tours that Obama used to sit around watching basketball all day, another episode of How to Read a Trump Comment, it's projection again. Trump sits around on his duff all day doing nothing, avoiding work, and projects that onto everybody else. So here's the story. A White House source has leaked nearly every day of President Trump's private schedule for the past 3 months. Why it matters? This unusually voluminous leak gives us unprecedented visibility into how the president spends his days. The schedules, which cover nearly every working day since the midterms, show that Trump has spent around 60% of his scheduled time over the past 3 months in unstructured executive time. We all know what that time is, by the way. Calling his friends on the phone, an unsecured private cell phone, no doubt, and various other malefactors who probably are screwing America 6 ways to Sunday. We've published every page of the leaked schedules in a piece that accompanies this item. To protect our source, we retyped the schedules in the same format that the West Wing staff receives them, so you can't analyze the pages for whether or not they were done on an IBM Selectric or not. What the schedules show? Trump, an early riser, usually spends the first 5 hours of the day. And what is the point of being an early riser if you spend the first 5 hours of the day in executive time? Each day's schedule places Trump in location Oval Office from 8 to 11 a.m., and that is probably not true. We heard early on that he was not even leaving the residence very often until 11 a.m. But Trump, who often wakes at 6 a.m., is never in the Oval Office during those hours. See, there you go, according to 6 sources with direct knowledge. Instead, he spends his mornings in the residence, watching TV, reading the papers, and that it can be done in a normal fashion. Consuming the news really is what you would hope the president would spend his day on, although honestly, with access to, classified information and the latest intelligence, you would hope that he would spend more time on that than watching TV news, for instance. And of course, on top of that, you might, let's get greedy and say, well, why don't you watch news that actually reports real news as opposed to Fox and Friends with 3 idiots sitting around on a couch saying, wouldn't it be awesome if there was more white people? That's really not helpful to anybody. Okay. Let's see. So there he is. He's usually spending his time in the residence, watching TV, reading the papers, and responding to what he sees and reads by phoning aides, members of Congress, friends, administration officials, and informal advisors. And, of course, tweeting about it. Here is a graphic breaking down the president's schedule based on available schedules from November 7th, 2018 to February 1st, 2019. Wow, all the way up to February 1st. 297 hours and 15 minutes spent in executive time out of a total scheduled time of 502 hours and 55 minutes. That's 503 hours. 503 hours, 300 of them are spent in executive time. There you go. Meetings, 77 hours, 5 minutes. Travel is 51 hours and 15 minutes. And by the way, remember that's a lot of flying back and forth to Mar-a-Lago, flying back and forth to his rallies, etc. So, that's a waste of time right there. Lunch, this is great. That's got a block. 39 hours. 38 hours and 20 minutes at events. So he spent more time at lunch than at events, whatever the hell that means. And 39, let's call that 40 hours out of the 500. They didn't do a percentage as far as I can tell on lunch. But should we stick with 39? 39 hours out of 500, and we'll round up to 503, is 7%. 7% of his, 60% is executive time, 7%, almost 10% of his time is lunch. That's nuts. This guy loves a meal. And I got to tell, most people eat meals daily. I don't know how many presidents, I don't know if all presidents take lunch every day. I would, mostly because I'd be like, oh my God, I have such a headache. I'm the president and there's so many things to worry about. Give me some lunch and see if I feel better. But he loves to do meetings over meals. Breakfast is a tough one for him because he doesn't get up and out of the house earlier enough. Dinner is something he only likes to do with friends. Lunch is his working meal, apparently. And he's held that over. But that is amazing. More lunch than events time. Which, I guess since the election, that makes a certain amount of sense. He used to spend a lot more time on events, campaigning for people and doing rallies. Trump's first meeting of the day, this piece continues, usually around 11 or 11:30 a.m., by the time we're done, is often an intelligence briefing or a 30-minute meeting with the chief of staff. Now remember, the first time he does anything during the day is a meeting, sometime between 11 and 11:30. He has one meeting, and then what time is it when he's done? That's right, lunchtime. So, sleeping in the residence, watching TV in anger, tweeting, come downstairs, chief of staff tells him what's on my schedule for the day. Well, for one thing, you blew half the day. So what's on the schedule for the rest of your day before you knock off for dinner at 5:30? Well, for one thing, lunch for an hour, and for another, this meeting. Oh, okay. What a day. Wow. And the intelligence briefings, as we just read in the previous piece, are a waste of time in and of themselves. So what are you going to do? Waste all morning watching television. Now, intelligence briefing is coming up after lunch. First, there's me telling you what you're going to do after lunch. Then there's lunch. And then after lunch, an intelligence briefing. Or sometimes, instead of me telling you what you're going to do, intelligence briefing. And then after that, call your friends and listen to the radio. Ugh. Since November 7th, the day after the midterm elections, Trump has spent around 297 hours in executive time, according to the 51 private schedules we've obtained. So that's interesting. I mean, how many hours is that on average in a day? Is there any days that are just all executive time? I don't know. For these same schedules, Trump has had about 77 scheduled hours of meetings that include policy planning, legislative strategy, and video recordings. So again, of all the time that's not on executive time, that's 40% of his scheduled time was left. Let me just do some more math here. So, the astonishing number is executive time, but this is 503 hours, 503 rounded up, and we'll take out 297 hours of executive time. That leaves 206 hours. 77 of it is meetings. 51 of it is travel. 39 of it is lunch. And 28 hours and 20 minutes of it is events. So honestly, 206 hours, that's not executive time. Travel doesn't count for anything. Let's take that out. Well, lunch doesn't count for anything. I know he says it's a working lunch. And travel, for him, granted, is different than it is for you and me. With Air Force One at his disposal, you can have meetings, that, and on the helicopter and all that. Events, that's usually garbage. 38 hours of that. Let's take that out. That's all there is, right? Okay, there's the 77 hours of meetings. But how much of that is garbage time is amazing. Ugh, This is really ridiculous. So, I did this backwards here. 503 hours minus the 297. That's executive time. Really what we should be adding is the travel time of 51 hours, the events time of 38 hours, and the lunch time of 39 hours. 128 hours of travel, lunch, and events versus 77 hours of meetings. That's after executive time. So what he does when he's out of his residence and talking to people, 77 out of 200 hours is doing something, and 128 of those hours is lunch, traveling to and from lunch, and events that don't include lunch events. Wow. Some days, and by the way, what sort of events would that include? That would include giving other people hamburgers or hamburgers or whatever he'd call it. So lunch for other people is an event. Lunch for him goes under lunch. Wow. That's really just bizarre. Some days, executive time totally predominates. I guess that's the answer to my earlier question. For instance, he had 1 hour of scheduled meetings. 1 hour. On January 18th. With Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and 7 hours of executive time. That would be right in the middle of the shutdown. 1 hour of meetings and 7 hours of watching TV. The day after the midterms, Trump's schedule had 30 minutes for a Chief of Staff meeting and more than 7 hours of executive time. Former Chief of Staff John Kelly introduced the concept of executive time because the president hated being locked into a regular schedule. He's always calling people, talking to people. A senior White House official told us he's always up to something. It's just not what you would consider typical structure. Because he's not just staring at the television. This is true. But he's calling, minor movie stars and other rich people who hang out at Mar-a-Lago and saying, what do you think about this and what do you think about that? Not really the way we had hoped the president would conduct himself. So here's another graphic, which is graphs it out by time each day. And yeah, look at that. There's November 23rd is all executive time, the entire day. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 9 hours of executive time. There's nothing else going on. No data is frequent. They have no data at all for a lot of late November. But basically it looks like, every day from 11 up to 11 a.m. is pretty much blocked out for him to goof off and watch TV. The private schedules we published below do not list all of Trump's meetings over the past 3 months. That's because many of his meetings are spur of the moment, according to senior White House officials with direct knowledge of his daily habits. It's also because a more detailed schedule kept within a very small, tight circle typically has 1 or 2 extra meetings per day that aren't listed on private schedules sent to staff. The president sometimes has meetings during executive time that he doesn't want most West Wing staff to know about for fear of leaks. And his mornings sometimes include calls with heads of state, political meetings, and meetings with counsel in the residence, which aren't captured on these schedules. So, in other words, trying to bail himself out of the Russia investigation. The private schedule we obtained from Trump had a media engagement at 4:30 p.m. on this past Wednesday, for example. The more detailed schedule revealed it was an interview with the right-wing Daily Caller, according to a source with direct knowledge. So it's not just, I'm going to talk to the media. I'm going to talk to the guy from Daily Caller, which is garbage. Wednesday's more detailed schedule also listed Trump's meeting with former presidential candidate and former Godfather's Pizza CEO Herman Cain, whom he is considering for a Federal Reserve governorship, per Bloomberg. We heard about that last week, but we didn't talk about it on the show. The private schedule obscured that meeting with executive time, by the way. And, that was kind of a weird development. And then I was informed that Herman Cain has actually served on one of the regional Federal Reserve banks boards in the past, which is amazing. But at least that would make him a relatively experienced pizza CEO anyway, for the new job. The longer view here. Chris Whipple, a student of presidential schedules who wrote the book, The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency, told us that there's almost no historical parallel for how this president spends his days. Thank God for that. The most important asset in any presidency is the president's time, Whipple said, and Trump is a guy who gives new meaning to the notion of an unstructured presidency. Responding to Axios' reporting, the White House press secretary Sarah Sanders emailed this statement: President Trump has different leadership style than his predecessors, and the results speak for themselves. No effing crap, they do. While he spends much of his average day in scheduled meetings, events, and calls, there is time to allow for a more creative environment that has helped make him the most productive president in modern history. It is not. That's a lie. President Trump has ignited a booming economy. Do you want to hear the rest of that? They deny the whole thing, and they say he's totally busy, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense, of course. He spends his days rattling around the White House and I guess probably spitting onto his comb and whatever he does to give himself that bizarro, wet look, slicked back disgustingness on the sides of his head. That was definitely substantive and well worth discussing. There's the New York Times sit-down interview, the transcript of which was published recently and which Daniel Dale took apart. I didn't even bother this time, I don't think, putting Daniel Dale's tweets into Pocket. They're just too frustrating, and there's too many of them. But if you want a great dissection of what happened in those interviews with a much more serious bent than you're likely to get from this show, but making the same observations, but in a little drier fashion, I would say, Daniel Dale is, of course, the place to go. All right, let's see. Other very important developments that we have ignored today. Let's see. Where shall we go next? There's a couple of things here. Let's change tracks just a little bit here. And right before the break, we will take a look at this piece. Ian Millhiser writing this one for Think Progress. Important update here about judges. You know, it's always worthy. It always pays to keep an eye on them. Trumpist judges, what are they up to? Trumpist judges prep get out of racism free card. What are we talking about here? Subheader says it's about time someone stood up for the most oppressed people in the country, white Republican elected officials. We've heard that sort of story before, but this is an interesting angle on it and an important one that Ian has identified here. Less than 2 weeks after President Donald Trump took office, a Republican federal judge in Alabama handed down an absolutely shocking opinion. The legal claims in Lewis versus Bentley are, to be fair, a bit of a stretch. After the majority black city council in Birmingham, Alabama, enacted an ordinance raising the minimum wage in Birmingham, the state legislature passed a law invalidating that ordinance. Every state lawmaker who supported this law was white, as was the governor who signed it. The plaintiffs in Lewis claim that this state law was enacted with racist intent, which would make it unconstitutional, rather than simply out of a desire to maintain conservative labor policy throughout the state. Interesting. Probably true, but difficult to prove, right? Yet, Judge R. David Proctor, a George W. Bush appointee, did not simply dismiss this case. He handed down an opinion that, if embraced by higher courts, would eviscerate virtually any civil rights plaintiff's ability to challenge a facially neutral law that was enacted in order to harm people of color. When a state can offer a legitimate, that is, non-racist explanation for why a law should exist, only the clearest proof that lawmakers acted with racist intent will allow a court to look past that explanation. We've discussed this similar situation pervades almost all of the judicial system and judicial precedent, largely because, of course, a lot of the laws that you're working with were written at a time when it was beyond belief that anyone, not that anyone would do such things, because obviously we have the laws because people were doing such things, but that, for instance, when we talk about the voting rights section review of congressional districting or state legislative districting in a southern state, they have to have their plans reviewed for the for racial balance, and to see whether the districts have been drawn in a facially discriminatory way. And if the Justice Department determines that they are in compliance, then overturning that determination becomes very difficult because the presumption is on their side. We didn't believe that the Federal Department of Justice would do this stuff, you see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let us continue with Ian Millhiser's piece here. Oops, so hold on a second. Gotta make sure to get rid of look at this pop up. I just opened up a USA Today article, and wow. There's a lot in my way here. Okay. But I need to go back to Ian Millhiser's article about the Trumpist judges. And I was sort of explaining how, very often we build into these laws presumptions that, the government is operating in good faith. And this is another one of these, standards here. When a state can offer a legitimate, that is non-racist, explanation for why a law should exist, only the clearest proof that lawmakers acted with racist intent will allow a court to look past that explanation. And sometimes even then, they refuse to look past that explanation. In the case of the North Carolina redistricting or the voting restrictions, we had a court ruling that basically said that these things had been the only way they got to this conclusion was they had emails in which the lawmakers were saying that this was the intent, and that they had been designed with almost surgical precision. And I'm not certain that the surgical precision alone would have been enough, but for the fact that somebody somewhere put down in writing, yeah, this is a great way to reduce the black vote. And that does it. There's the clearest proof. But that's kind of what it takes, is an admission that they did it for racist purposes. And that's not always going to exist. But let me continue with Ian's right up here. It should be noted that none of the cases Judge Proctor cited to support this novel legal rule comes close to supporting it. And not the novel legal rule that only the clearest proof will be capable of looking past a non-racist explanation. But I guess the novel rule of overruling the local minimum wage, I'm not certain exactly what he's trying to get at here. It should be noted that none of the cases Judge Proctor cited to support this novel legal rule even came close to supporting it, and a panel of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit tossed out Porter's clearest proof standard last July. Okay, so he is talking about this. It's not that novel, to be honest, although, it's not often put in those terms, but there are several legal standards where you have to, the usual proof that's asked for, the usual standard of evidence, is you need to prove that a ruling is otherwise is arbitrary and capricious. That comes from administrative law. But I don't know that there even is a standard that's accepted out there that specifically applies to trying to determine whether there was racist intent in formulating a state law. But I guess he tried to create one here. So the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit tossed out Porter's clearest proof standard last July, recklessly plucked from an unrelated line of precedent. Judge Charles Wilson wrote of Proctor's attempt to immunize racist lawmakers from suits. This requirement runs contrary to decades of established equal protection jurisprudence. Yet there is an unhappy epilogue to this story for future civil rights plaintiffs. The full 11th Circuit, now flush with 3 Trump judges, announced on Wednesday that it was tossing out Judge Wilson's opinion and that the full court would rehear the case. It's a very real risk now that Proctor's clearest proof test will become the law in several southern states. Nor is Proctor's opinion an isolated incident. And here's where the stuff really becomes worth keeping an eye on, and to say the very least. To the contrary, it's part of a much larger pattern from top Republican advocates, Republican judges, and top Republican advocates who became Trump judges. So all 3 categories there, to hamstring any suit alleging racial discrimination by lawmakers. Indeed, some of these opinions go even further than Proctor, not simply trying to boot civil rights cases out of court, but suggesting that the mere allegation that a lawmaker acted with racist intent is itself an unforgivable sin. And here we go back to the almost surgical precision thing. In 2013, North Carolina Republicans enacted what may be the most aggressive voter suppression law since Jim Crow. The law, as a federal appeals court later explained, targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. That was their line in the finding. While drafting the law, lawmakers, quote, requested data on the use by race of a number of voting practices, unquote. And they then appeared to have used that data to maximize the law's impact on black voters while simultaneously minimizing the impact on whites. The data showed, for example, that African Americans disproportionately used the first 7 days of early voting, and so the General Assembly amended the bill to eliminate the first week of early voting. Similarly, the law did not simply require voters to show photo ID in order to cast a ballot. Rather, the legislature amended the bill to exclude many of the alternative photo IDs used by African Americans, while simultaneously permitting only the kinds of IDs that white North Carolinians were more likely to possess. The appeals court decision striking this law down was not disturbed by the Supreme Court, largely because it first reached the court after Justice Antonin Scalia's death. Nevertheless, all 4 of the Republicans who sat on the court in the summer of 2016 voted to reinstate this voter suppression law. Likely thanks to the appeals court decision striking down this law, Republican Governor Pat McCrory narrowly lost his bid for re-election. Yet in his final days as a lame duck governor, a team of lawyers hired by McCrory filed a petition asking the Supreme Court to review the lower court's decision striking down the law. The lead counsel on this attorney, why does it say on this attorney? The lead counsel on this case was a lawyer or attorney named Kyle Duncan. Duncan's petition is a paean to white racial resentment. Rather than simply making his best legal arguments and hoping that the justices would see things his way, Duncan appealed to the Republican Supreme Court with a vicious battle cry. How dare the United States Courts of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit accuse a white person of racism? There is no worse charge against the state than deliberate racial discrimination, according to Duncan's petition, yet the Fourth Circuit did not hesitate to level it here. It accused and convicted the North Carolina legislature of deliberately designing its laws not just to disenfranchise African Americans, but to usher in a new era of Jim Crow. Such an allegation, according to Duncan's petition, is an affront to North Carolina's citizens and their elected representatives. In the short term, Duncan's gambit failed. McCrory left office. The state's new Democratic leadership withdrew the petition, and the Supreme Court ultimately decided not to hear the case after receiving what Chief Justice John Roberts described as a blizzard of filings over who is and who is not authorized to seek review in this court under North Carolina law. But the Republican lawyer got the last laugh. Thanks to Donald Trump, he's now a judge on the United States Courts of Appeal for the Fifth Circuit. So in place to rule on his own novel theory. The truth is out there is the next section here. Duncan and the special brand of white grievance that Duncan brought to the North Carolina case will be right at home on this court. In July of 2016, the conservative Fifth Circuit surprised most court watchers with a 9-6 decision holding that a Texas voter suppression law violates the Voting Rights Act. That act prohibits voting laws that result in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen to vote on account of race or color. And as the majority opinion explained in Veazey versus Abbott, Texas's voter ID law violated this prohibition because of its disproportionate impact on black and Latino voters. As one expert testified, Hispanic and African American voters are, respectively, 195% and 305% more likely than their Anglo peers to lack a photo ID. Judge Edith Jones wrote an absolutely livid dissent on behalf of herself and 4 colleagues. By keeping alive a separate claim that Texas acted with racist intent when it enacted this voter suppression law, Jones wrote, "The majority fans the flames of perniciously irresponsible racial name-calling," which of course it is not. It is a call-out of racism, which is not racial name-calling. But that's the key warning of Ian's piece here, is that Trumpist judges will institutionalize the notion that calling people racist is the real racism. That's what he's getting at. The multi-thousand-page record yields not a trace, much less a legitimate inference of racial bias by the Texas legislature, Jones falsely claimed. Yet the majority emulates the clever capacity of Area 51 alien enthusiasts, who, lacking any real evidence, espied a vast but clandestine government conspiracy to conceal the truth. She added a plea for the poor Texas officials forced to endure allegations that by enacting a law whose primary function was to prevent disadvantaged communities from casting a ballot, they might have acted with racist motives. Inflammatory and unsupportable charges of racist motivation poison the political atmosphere and tarnish the images of every state legislator, and the Texas lieutenant governor and governor, wrote Jones. Just in case there's any doubt, these charges are not unsupportable. As the majority opinion explained, the drafters of Texas's voter ID laws were aware of the likely disproportionate effects on the law on minorities, and they have nonetheless passed the bill without adopting a number of proposed ameliorative measures that might have lessened this impact. One state senator testified that the Voting Rights Act has outlived its useful life, and the case record shows that Texas has a history of justifying voter suppression efforts such as the poll tax and literacy tests with the race-neutral reason of promoting ballot integrity. But for Jones and our 4 fellow colleagues, this wasn't a case about whether a Republican-controlled legislature, I would guess, can enact a law that is known to suppress black and Latino voting, both of which are racial groups that tend to prefer Democrats over Republicans. This was a case about the precious reputations of the predominantly white officials tarred by an allegation of racism. The duty of the courts, in Jones's mind, isn't to root out attacks on the franchise. It's to protect the reputation of white conservatives. Vesey was an unexpected victory for voting rights, but it is likely that Jones will have the last laugh. Since taking office, Trump added 5 new judges to the Fifth Circuit, including Kyle Duncan. It is likely, in other words, that at least half of the court's active judges share Jones's view that it is emphatically the duty of the judicial department to say that white people are innocent of allegations of racism, even when those white people actively prevent voters of color from exercising the right to vote. Next section, enter Justice Alito, which I don't recommend. In case there's any doubt, the bitter racial resentment seen in Duncan's petition and Jones's opinion is not limited to a handful of lower court judges. Much of it became the law of the land after the Supreme Court's decision in Abbott versus Perez last June. To be sure, Justice Samuel Alito's majority opinion in Perez is not nearly as vitriolic as Jones's dissent in Vesey. While Jones writes with the barely harnessed rage of a MAGA rally, Alito writes with the clinical detachment of a eugenics textbook. Yet, even if the Roberts Court is unlikely to embrace the Trumpian bombast of judges like Jones and Duncan, Perez shows that the Supreme Court Republicans are broadly sympathetic to Jones's goals. The facts of Perez are unusual and unlikely to repeat, especially after the Supreme Court's 2013 decision striking down much of the Voting Rights Act. In 2011, while the Voting Rights Act was still intact, Texas drew racially gerrymandered maps. A federal court in D.C. ultimately concluded that these maps were not legal. Thus, as Texas's 2012 primary elections drew nigh, the state did not have lawful maps that it could use in those elections. With no time to fully litigate the case and craft maps that fully comply with the law, a federal court in Texas drew rushed interim maps in March of 2012 so that Texas could still have an election. Many of the districts in this interim map closely resembled the racially gerrymandered districts of the 2011 maps. And the court emphasized that this interim map is not a final ruling on the merits of any claims asserted by the plaintiffs, or in this case, I'll start that sentence over again. Many of the districts in this interim map closely resembled the racially gerrymandered districts of the 2011 maps, and the court emphasized that this interim map is not a final ruling on the merits of any claims asserted by the plaintiffs in this case, or of any of the other cases consolidated with this case. Okay. Then, in 2013, the state legislature ratified those interim maps as its own, thus leaving many of the still gerrymandered districts from the 2011 maps intact. Alito's opinion in Perez held that most of these districts will never be fully scrutinized by the courts. Whenever a challenger claims that a state law was enacted with discriminatory intent, Alito wrote, the burden of proof lies with the challenger, not with the state. That is, indeed, the ordinary rule in racial discrimination cases, but in this case, a court had already determined that the 2011 maps were illegal, and Texas's 2013 law retained many of the gerrymandered districts. Nevertheless, Alito concluded nearly all of those districts must stand. According to Perez, Texas didn't enact the 2013 law because it wanted to enshrine gerrymandered maps into law. It did so because it wanted to bring the legislation about the state's districting plans to an end as expeditiously as possible. Alito, in other words, created a distinction between laws enacted with racist intent and laws enacted to shut down litigation alleging racist intent. That's a mighty fine distinction. Indeed, it is such a fine distinction that it raises a cloud of uncertainty over any future lawsuit alleging that lawmakers acted with a discriminatory purpose. After Perez, lawmakers now enjoy such a strong presumption of racial innocence that only the most egregious cases have a chance of prevailing in court. The Supreme Court may not speak with the caustic voice of an Edith Jones yet, but it appears eager to protect white officials from the mere allegation that they might be racist. How very interesting. So something to keep an eye out for sure, and beware. Let's see. Speaking of norms that will perhaps be misinterpreted, and the fact that the State of the Union is coming up tomorrow, I saw a tweet this morning that I thought was we would be wise to share. Why did this come up? This isn't what I wanted, is it? Let's see. It's not, but maybe I can find what I was looking for. That really, Well, a tweet from Mr. Reynolds that I retweeted earlier this morning. I'm just going to have to scroll back and see if I can find it instead and share it with you that way. It wasn't that long ago. Hopefully, I can find this thing. Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, look at that. Sorry, I am not authorized to see this status. What happened? Did he eliminate the tweet? Well, I still have the text of it somewhere. Is this not in my tweets and replies? That's an odd response to get from this. Let's see. I'll take one more moment to scroll through this. Yeah. All right. Well, there's the original one, and there's my reply to it. I'm just wondering why that would have been eliminated. But the observation that they were making, I'm curious if I can figure out why it would be deleted at this point, was the a photo. Well, it included a photo of President Obama giving a previous State of the Union address, backed by, of course, sitting right behind him would be the vice president in his capacity as president of the Senate. That would have been Joe Biden. And the Speaker of the House, obviously in the capacity of Speaker of the House, the head of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan. And it's a moment in which I guess the president has delivered a particularly worthy note on something or other. And Biden is joining others in a standing ovation for it. But Ryan remains sitting on his hands, seated, not rising for an ovation and not clapping at all, which is entirely normal. And I guess that's why I really liked the idea of sharing this tweet. This person posits this way. This is the text of the tweet. Just remember when MSM, mainstream media, not just Fox News, questions or criticizes Speaker Pelosi for not standing for the applause lines from Donald Trump's State of the Union and portray her as too political, be reminded of this picture when Obama spoke and Ryan was Speaker. And I don't know whether it's an AP photo or that he had some particular reason for calling out the AP, but they are tagged here. And yes, I should point out that is actually the normal flow of things. There are very often partisan responses to the State of the Union, and those members of the president's party will frequently stand for a standing ovation and for additional applause, whereas members of the opposition party will either have nothing whatsoever to say about the situation. Occasionally they'll get some polite applause, but they're not going to stand over it. And this is the sort of thing that, for instance, in years past, particularly, you would, if you would propose a tax cut, for instance, you would get a standing ovation from Republicans. Some Democrats might say, okay, I think tax cut is actually an okay policy, and applaud lightly. Others would say, I'm in complete disagreement and have nothing whatsoever to say and would just basically sit there waiting for the applause to end. Of course, when the shoe is on the other foot and Democratic presidents are giving the address, you would occasionally have members of the Republican Party shout out, "You lie," about things, which was sort of a departure, let's say, from typical State of the Union decorum. But it is absolutely typical of State of the Union address decorum, no matter who the president is and no matter which party is in the majority, that the opposite party will frequently refrain from applauding. I mean, you're free to do that. And they make quite a show of it sometimes. But yeah, I think this person is on it in terms of the prediction. I don't doubt that there will be pundits and analysts and television anchors who, for whatever reason, choose to ignore all of these years of practice and point to Pelosi not applauding something that the president said as somehow disrespectful or unpatriotic. And it's in fact normal procedure. It's not the most polite, but it's normal. And I wonder if they'll treat it as some sort of an anomaly. We'll see tomorrow night what they decide to do with that. I really think that they're on to something there. Let's see. The other big story of the weekend, besides the transcripts and the revelations that the intelligence community is completely disconnected from the president's thought process by the president of having dismissed all of them, and they all need to go back to school. The other big bean spilling story of the day was the totally inconsequential but likewise irresistible story of his outrageous skin color. They actually did a story on that in the New York Times. You will have seen it by now, I am sure, or at least you will at least have watched people discussing it on Twitter. In the pale of winter, Trump's tan remains a state secret. Yes, they actually asked, what is it that leads to his bizarre coloration? The orangeness of his face. And mechanically speaking, how did this even happen? The answer that they got was, no, he doesn't use a tanning bed. No, he doesn't get spray tan. He doesn't use bronzers. He's just got, this is what they told the newspapers, good genes. It's good genes that leave him orange looking, except around the eyes and lips, where he is pale and disgusting looking, mostly reminiscent of Darth Vader removing his helmet inside of his little pressure pod there. He looks ridiculous. And I have maintained from the outset that we're really fooling ourselves here, that this guy, I mean, we understand this to be like, oh, he's trying to look tan, but orange isn't tan. I mean, we know what tan looks like, and that's not it. So at bottom, the president of the United States paints his face orange every day on purpose for public appearances, and doesn't paint around his eyes or his lips for whatever reason, and makes it completely obvious that he's doing this. And everybody's like, well, maybe he's going to a Broncos game or something, or he's a Miami Dolphins fan, and he ran out of turquoise for the other half of the face. He paints his face a completely unnatural color, and everybody's like, well, maybe he's trying to be tan. And he's not totally insane. He's not vermin supreme. He's not wearing a boot on his head. He's painting his face orange, which is maybe tan-ish, is what they're trying to get at. I don't know. This is how we rationalize these things, and it's probably time to stop. Katie Rogers wrote the New York Times piece. Is it long? Not really, but I guess what really is of interest here is that people, I think, decided to go off the record to answer the question of what's up with this dummy's face, and they all they can say is good genes, and like why you need to be off the record to say it's good genes, or I'll give it to you on background on a condition of anonymity, because I don't want the president to hear that I'm the one that said good genes. I don't know. I'm not certain why that happened, but that's a media criticism that we could take up any day of the week, really, but we'll perhaps save for another day. All right. Lastly, I guess, just to keep up to date on things as we're making our exit for the day, good call here from Jack Ox, who sent me this story. I had seen it circulating elsewhere but very true and very worthy of much more extensive discussion. But a Washington Post piece here, Juliet Alperin, Josh Dawsey, Sung Min Kim teaming up for the piece under the headline, "It's way too many. As vacancies pile up in the Trump administration, senators grow concerned." Too many vacancies have gone unfilled, and we should read that in conjunction with the piece that I saw being circulated over Twitter that says that Trump is very open in his preference for keeping acting officials in place because he has much more flexibility to hire and fire rather than going with Senate-confirmed actual permanent secretaries of cabinet departments or other important bureaus in the government. Two parallel actions that should be read together and should be compared to previous presidents. We'll perhaps give some more time over to that tomorrow, but I wanted to at least put that on the record as one more of the important stories circulating today. And that's not to mention all the important ones that Justice Putnam will bring you next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we'll try and pick out some of the best to share with you in just a moment.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here you go. 90 Democrats and one lone Republican sign on to a bill giving back pay to federal contract workers. Trumpist judges standing up for the most oppressed people in the country. This story we talked about just a minute ago. You'll get his take on that, along with yet more about anti-vax parents, the measles outbreak, and more next.